Hey, greetings programs, it's BC Alloy 7 and welcome to my taking it back to the old school review for Super Metroid 2014 edition. And if you think this is going to be yet another review full of glowing nostalgic praise for a game from a childhood long past, then think again. Surprisingly, this playthrough didn't go as well as I imagined it would, and I'm going to break tradition here just a little bit with this review. I know typically I'd use our patented gamer category review system for a review, but I'm going to break away from that and make this video more conversational for really one main reason, and that's most of you have probably already played this game and have an understanding of what categories it would fit into and how you'd respond to it. And I want to talk to you about my more recent experience in review form and then have a conversation about it at the end. But for the two of you that may not know what Super Metroid is, or maybe you haven't played it, it's an action-adventure platform game from the Super Nintendo that dropped back in 1994. Metroid as a whole, the whole franchise, is one of the most popular series in Nintendo history. Here's a fun fact that you may not have known though. Out of all the library of Nintendo games, Metroid is one of the most popular ones, but it's also one of the lowest selling out of all of its popular games. Interesting. Maybe that's why we don't get so many Metroid games every couple of years like we do the Marios and the other types of games in the Nintendo library. Alright, so why did I decide to do a review for Super Metroid 20 years after it dropped and probably 4 billion other reviews out there on the internet? And it's real simple. I've been saying for the last 10 years that the original Metroid on NES was probably my favorite game of all time, and many of my friends and even some of you have called me crazy for liking it better than Super Metroid. So I'm doing this review, or I played this game to find out if I really am crazy or if Super Metroid is actually better than the original Metroid. And I've already played the original Metroid and gotten the review written for that. Let's just say, spoiler alert, I am crazy. I still like the original Metroid better than Super Metroid. And here's why. Let's talk about what went right. First and foremost, nostalgia kicked in right off the bat when I fired the game up. You guys remember the first time you played Super Metroid and you got that really horrible voice acting? The last Metroid is in captivity, the galaxy's at peace. Like, it was horrible back then. It's still horrible now, but now it's kind of horrible in a good way because it reminds you of that first experience with the game where it's like, oh, yo, they're talking. You know what I mean? Just that nostalgia factor kicks in immediately. Soundtrack is another thing I got to give this game props for. Nintendo nails the soundtrack with Super Metroid. They always do. It sets the mood and the tone exactly right on this horrible just planet where everything's trying to kill you, and the music's real ominous and scary, almost like a horror movie. And I think Metroid games probably pull that off better than anything else I've ever played. And then there's the familiarity with its predecessor, and I'd say Nintendo and even Square Enix, when it comes to the Final Fantasy series, maybe not their entire library, are the best at incorporating sounds, characters, and familiar sights into their sequels. And then you have the epic boss battles, which are still here and actually harder than I remembered, which was a good thing. That Kraid fight was no joke. Like, it came down to the last sliver of health, and even some of the mini bosses were beating the crap out of me. Maybe I'm just getting old and I suck at games now, but I actually appreciated that the game still held challenge, even as an adult who's played a million other games since I played Super Metroid as a kid. But if there's something that went right, you know there's got to be something that went wrong. And right off the bat, linearity is what stood out to me. And I found myself thinking, what happened to all this exploration I remember doing when I played Super Metroid back in the day? The world's technically open, but I never realized back then just how much Super Metroid controls your ability to traverse it by basically hiding your ability to traverse behind what I call paywalls, or you have to have a certain item to continue going this way. And it's not that the original Metroid didn't do that, and it's not even that clones and descendants of the Metroid franchise don't do that, but I feel like Super Metroid did it in a way that was extremely tedious, almost to the point where I couldn't pinpoint exactly why I felt that. But I remember, like, going to get the special items just felt like a chore, because eventually I was going to have to travel all the way back to the other side of the map and go up an elevator somewhere to remember, oh yeah, I needed a grappling hook to get past this part to get another set of missiles. And it didn't feel like exploration. It felt more like you got to go find this stuff and then come all the way back here just to be able to find some missiles or open a door that you couldn't get through before. And that really gets old. I know it's a limitation of the technology back in the day, but when you've played other games that have done that kind of concept better, it's really hard to go back to Metroid and appreciate it. Next up, you have the controls, and they're not as tight as I remember from when I was a kid. Now, there's a couple things at play that could have caused that. One, it could be just that I'm old now and I suck at games, or maybe the Wii U Pro controller is not as precise as the original SNES controller was. And I remember my friend Rob was playing the game with me. He was saying the same thing. And or the Super Metroid just not as precise with the controls as we remember, because back then there were probably no games that did it better. We've played games now that have. Maybe the controls just aren't as tight as games are today. I don't know, but the controls didn't feel that great. And then lastly, and probably most important with the things that went wrong for me, was boredom. Yes, I actually got bored playing Super Metroid, and a lot of that is tied to the linearity that I spoke about earlier. And maybe it's just because I played the game so many times 15 years ago and beat it so many times. Like, I had the game's maps memorized. I beat this game so many times as a youngling. Or maybe it's just other games have taken the Metroid formula and refined it. So think about games like Shadow Complex. If you haven't played that, give that game a shot. Absolutely. Shadow Complex really takes that Metroid formula, makes the controls spot on, and makes it short, sweet, to the point, and it does its part, and then it gets off the stage, gives you the ending, and then you just remember it. It's fun, and you move on. I felt like Metroid was hindering me a little bit more than Shadow Complex was in terms of the exploration and discovery when it came to the special items needed to traverse the world. And I think it's just because you've had 20 years to figure that out. I don't think that Shadow Complex is necessarily an altogether better game. It's just, it's learned over 20 years how to take the things that were done 20 years ago and make them a little bit better. But this isn't a review about Shadow Complex. I'm just using that to make the comparison. And I think one of the things that also put me off, something that I hate, is that Metroid focuses more on the actual platforming versus adventuring, more so than a game like Shadow Complex. And I'm going to tell you straight up, I hate platform games now. I don't play them. They're not my thing. Like, I try to play Mario with my son, and I can't. I get 5 or 10 minutes into Mario and I'm just done. I'm bored. I don't like jumping on things. It just doesn't suit me anymore. And I think Metroid still had that platformer flavor. It wasn't a full-on adventure game like some of its clones are today. It still forced you to make precise jumps and weird kind of jump puzzly type things. And it's just not my thing, yo. And I think that's what led to the boredom. All right, so bottom line, I still think Super Metroid is a great game in the halls of history and legend. But I think if I were to sit here and tell you that based on today's standards that Metroid is an absolutely superb game, I think I'd have to look at it with nostalgia-colored glasses. Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe it still hits that sweet spot for you. But for me, it doesn't. I think as a gamer, I've changed so much in what I like. I mean, you take my comment about platformers. I played platformers so much as a kid. Loved them. Loved Super Mario World. Still love Super Mario 2. That's one of the few platformers I can still play. But by and large, platformers don't suit me anymore. And backtracking across map after map after map after map screen just is so tedious to me now, because I've played games like Oblivion and Skyrim, which allow me to find a point on a map and travel exactly to it if I've already found it, which removes so much of the tedium of gaming. And so now I'm playing those games in today's world and then trying to go back and play an older game that didn't really have that figured out. I think it's just hard for a person like me who appreciates something like Oblivion or Skyrim giving me that ability. It's hard, and I miss it when it's not there. And that's pretty much going to do it for me, friends. Again, I'm not saying the Super Metroid is not a great game. I believe, objectively speaking, it very much is. I just think in today's world where there's so many other games competing for your attention, it's just really hard, at least for me, to go back and love this game the way I did as a kid. But I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. Have you played Super Metroid again in recent years? And did you have a similar experience? Or did you go back and play it and say, oh, this is just exactly as awesome as I remember it? For me, it wasn't. I'd love to hear from you if it was for you, and then talk with you about why that is. What is it about Metroid that still hits that sweet spot for you, whereas for me, it just does not? And with that in mind, friends, allow me to tell you a fond adieu. Thank you for watching. Thank you for commenting and joining the conversation. And go ahead and subscribe if you haven't done that already. But until next time, until all are one, is BC the Brain Supreme signing off. Peace and Godspeed.